I'm not worth much, sir, but I can cook.
I'm not worth much, sir, but I can cook. Those words had not yet left her mouth, but they were already forming somewhere deep inside Clara May Benton, the morning the men in dark coats came up her dusty path. Clara was 27 when her world folded in. Her husband had been in the ground less than 2 weeks when a hard knock sounded on her cabin door. She opened it with her apron still on, expecting a neighbor come late with condolences. Instead, 3 strangers stood there, boots polished, hats too stiff for mountain country. One carried a leather satchel, fat with papers. "Mrs. Benton?" he asked. "Yes," she said, though the words still felt strange. "I'm here on behalf of Denver and Frontier Trust," he went on. "Your late husband took on a considerable amount of debt. He secured those notes with this property. The bank is calling them due." Clara's hands went cold. "There must be some mistake," she whispered. "Tom never said anything about losing the house. Whether he spoke of it or not doesn't change the ink, ma'am. By law, you have 7 days to vacate. The cabin, the furniture, anything of value will be seized and sold." She looked back at the one-room world behind her, the rocker that had been her mother's, the quilt she had sewn the winter she and Tom thought there might be a baby, the iron pan that had fried every egg they ever owned when times were good. "Where am I supposed to go?" she asked. "That's not our concern," one of the other men muttered. They catalogued her life with pencils and clipped voices. A week later, a wagon creaked away down the trail, piled high with proof she had once belonged somewhere. They took the rocker, the quilts, the few pieces of jewelry her mother had hidden in a hem, tools, crocs, everything that would bring coin. Some things, though, were too worn out for men who thought only in columns of numbers. When the dust settled, Clara still had 3 objects wrapped in a dish towel at her feet: a blackened cast-iron pan bowed from years of fire, a cracked stoneware pot that had belonged to her grandmother, and a wooden spoon smoothed by decades of stirring other people's hunger away. Everything else, including the cabin, was no longer hers, so she walked. She followed the wagon ruts away from the only home she had known as an adult, the bundle on her back and the ache sitting heavy in her chest. The mountain air was thin and sharp. Sage and dust rose with each footfall. That night she slept under a crooked pine, her bundle for a pillow. On the second day, she found a creek and drank from her cupped hands. Her stomach growled loud in the empty air. She ate a few wild berries she recognized and kept moving. Stopping felt too much like giving up, and something stubborn in her refused to lie down and wait for whatever came next. By the 3rd evening, her boots had rubbed her heels raw. Just when she thought she could not go farther, she saw the outlines of a frontier town ahead, a handful of buildings huddled in a fold of the land, lanterns flickering to life one by one as the light faded. People would be there, Clara thought, and people meant the possibility of work, of food, of not freezing under a pine when the mountain night turned hard. She straightened her dress as best she could, wiped her face with the edge of her sleeve, and walked into town with her bundle of cooking tools on her back, not yet knowing that before the next sunset she would kneel in the street before a stranger and offer the only thing she had left. Dry Ridge was hardly a town, one crooked street, a leaning saloon, a church that looked tired of praying. Clara walked that street from end to end with her bundle on her back and one sentence on her tongue. "Good evening. My name is Clara May Benton. I can cook. I'll work for a bed and a little food. Most doors barely opened. We don't hire strangers. Times are bad." By sundown, everyone in Dry Ridge knew there was a young woman looking for work. Not one of them had room for her. The square in the center of town held a dry fountain and 2 rusty benches. Clara sank onto one of them and pressed her hand to her stomach until the worst of the cramp passed. Pride had worn thin. Hunger was what she had left. She had 3 coins. The bankmen had missed them when they emptied her drawers. Back then they had seemed like nothing. Now they were all she owned. She took them to the mercantile and came out with a small paper twist of dried beans. For a moment she stood in the cooling air, feeling the crackle of the paper, listening to laughter spill from the saloon doors. So she did the only thing that still made sense. Right there in the square, Clara built herself a kitchen. She gathered a few twigs, ringed them with stones, and coaxed a little fire to life with the last match in her box. She filled her cracked pot at the public well, poured in the beans, and set it over the flame. From a hidden pouch she took the last of her dried thyme and a pinch of salt. Her hands moved the way they always had in happier kitchens, sure and calm. As the water warmed, A soft smell rose into the air, beans and smoke and a hint of herb. Simple food, but honest. Clara stirred with her wooden spoon and felt the first thin strip of peace she had known in weeks. Footsteps scraped on the stones. Smells mighty good for a town that mostly lives on hardtack and bad coffee, a rough voice said. She looked up. An old man with hair white as creek foam stood there, leaning on a crooked stick. His coat was patched. His eyes were bright. "It's only beans, sir," Clara said, "but I'm doing my best. That's more than most." He eased himself down beside her. "Name's Ephraim Cole. Mind if I sit here and pretend somebody's cooking for me on purpose?" A small, tired smile tugged at her mouth. "I've got more smell than beans," she said, "but I'll share both." When the beans softened, she divided them and pressed half into his hands. "Please, it tastes better that way." He took one careful bite, chewed, and closed his eyes. For a heartbeat, she thought she had done something wrong. Then tears slid quietly into his beard. "My Annie's been gone 10 years, he said. "Nobody's cooked for me like this since." Heat pricked Clara's eyes. Maybe she was not worth much to banks and ledgers, but here, on a rusty bench beside a stranger, she had made something that mattered. When the pot was empty, Ephraim wiped his mouth and turned to her. "Now you tell me, Miss Clara May," he said. "How does a woman who cooks like that end up boiling beans in the town square with nowhere in the world to go?" She told him in a few plain sentences. The fever that took Tom, the men with papers, the cabin stripped, the long walk, the closed doors. He listened without interrupting. When she fell silent, he nodded toward the dark line of mountains. "This town won't take you in," he said. "Folks here are afraid of anything that might require them to care, but there's a place up there that just might. Stonewater Ridge Ranch belongs to a man named Silas Reed. He once rode as collection muscle for that same trust, till something in him broke. Hard, they say. Fair too, if a person does honest work. And a spread that size can't run long without a cook." Clara followed his gaze to the ridgeline, where the last of the light traced the teeth of the peaks in pale gold. "Do you think he'd hire a stranger?" she asked. "I think if he has any sense left under that hard shell," Ephraim said, "he'll smell that pan of beans on you before you even step in his yard." Clara left Dry Ridge before first light. Ephraim's directions folded into her memory like a map she could not afford to lose. The trail climbed toward the high country, past leaning pines and rock teeth. By mid-morning, the town was a smudge behind her, and the mountains stood ahead like a wall. Her boots rubbed her heels raw, but hope tugged her forward harder than hunger pulled her back. At last, she saw it. Stonewater Ridge Ranch lay in a shallow bowl between two ridges. Fenced pastures, long barns, a big log house standing square against the wind. Men moved like dark stitches against the pale grass, bringing in horses, checking fence. Smoke rose from a chimney in a steady line. Clara paused on the ridge, heart pounding. One more door, she thought, maybe the last. She straightened her dress, wiped dust from her face, and walked down into the yard. Ranch hands slowed to watch. A few nudged one another, curious about the woman with a bundle on her back and no escort. Before she could decide who to ask for, a voice spoke behind her. "You lost, Ma'am." She turned. The man near the woodpile was tall and broad-shouldered, his shirt sleeves rolled up on strong forearms, dusted with sawdust. Dark hair, cut short, a faint scar along his jaw. His eyes were the kind that weighed and measured everything, dark, steady, and wary. "No, sir," Clara said. "I'm looking for Mr. Silas Reed." "You found him." He set down the axe and wiped his hands on his trousers. "What's your business here?" "My name is Clara May Benton," she said. "I can cook." "I heard your ranch might need one." One of the hands let out a low whistle that died quickly under Silas's glance. He studied her in silence, the worn boots, the dust at her hem, the bundle she carried like something important. "You got experience?" he asked at last. "I cooked for my family and the men who worked our place," she answered. "I can make biscuits, stews, roasts, pies. I can stretch what's in a pantry and I don't waste." Silas's jaw tightened briefly, as if her words had brushed against some old memory. Once he had read off inventories in a cold room while families cried in the yard outside. Once he had carried a satchel for the same bank that had taken this woman's cabin. He pushed the thought away. "Plenty have said the same," he said. Most lasted about a week. I don't keep bad food or lazy hands. I'm neither, Clara replied quietly. But I understand if you want proof. For a long heartbeat, he simply looked at her. Then he nodded once. You'll get 7 days, he said. You'll feed 19 people 3 times a day, men who work hard and don't have patience for weak coffee or doughy bread. If they eat well and the pantry's not bare when you're done, you stay on with wages. If not, you walk away without argument. Clear? Yes, sir, she said. Relief made her knees weak, but she held herself straight. We're clear. He called to a fair-haired hand nearby. Toby, show Miss Benton the room behind the kitchen. Make sure she has linens, then walk her through the pantry. Breakfast is at 6, dinner at noon, supper at 6. She starts tomorrow. The room Toby led her to was small but clean. A narrow bed, a peg for her dress, a cracked basin under a tiny window. To Clara, it looked like luxury. She set a bundle on the bed and laid her 3 old tools beside the pillow. For the first time since the bankmen came, they looked like the beginning of something instead of the last scraps of a life. The next morning she was up long before dawn. She washed her face in cold water, tied her hair back tight, and stepped into the big kitchen. The quiet felt expectant. She lit the lamps and the stove, opened the pantry, and took stock with a practiced eye. Flour, beans, coffee, cured pork, potatoes, onions, a few vegetables, some dried apples. It would do. She set bread dough to rise, cut pork into small pieces to fry with onions, started coffee strong enough to make a tired man stand straighter, whipped eggs with a little milk until they were light. Her hands moved faster than her thoughts, following habits learned in warmer days. By the time boots sounded in the hallway, the room was warm and full of good smells. The men filed in, rough and sleepy, then stopped short. Morning, Clara said, forcing a calm she did not feel. Find yourselves a seat. I'll bring plates. They obeyed. The first to taste was Toby. He bit into a biscuit, blinked, then took a slower second bite. Well now, he said under his breath, that's different. Around the table, heads bent over plates, spoons scraped, coffee cups emptied. For a few minutes, the only sounds were chewing and quiet murmurs of surprise. Clara moved from place to place, refilling what emptied, feeling a tight knot in her chest begin to ease. Men who usually shoveled food like coal were eating slower, actually tasting. When most plates were cleared, she felt eyes on her and turned. Silas stood in the doorway, arms folded, expression unreadable. He never ate with the hands, Toby had told her. He took his meals alone, with his ledgers. But this morning he stepped fully into the kitchen. I'll take mine here, he said. She set a plate in front of him with biscuits, eggs and pork, and poured coffee into a heavy mug. Her fingers shook only a little. He took one bite, chewed and said nothing. Yet she saw it anyway, the way his shoulders eased a fraction, the brief, almost unwilling flicker of surprise in his eyes, the fork going back for another piece without hesitation. It wasn't praise, but it was enough to tell her she had not been a fool to climb that mountain with nothing but hope and a blackened pan. The week Silas had promised came and went, then another and another. Nobody said the trial was over, but no one showed her the road either. Her room stayed hers, the kitchen became hers. Under Clara's care, Stonewater Ridge changed in small ways first. There was always hot coffee on before sunrise. The bread came out of the oven, golden and soft, instead of hard as saddle leather. Supper didn't mean whatever could be fried in one pan. It meant stews that tasted like someone had thought about them. The men noticed. They worked with more spirit. They lingered longer at the table, trading stories, asking if there might be a second helping of whatever had just run out. Someone started leaving bunches of wildflowers on the kitchen step. Another quietly fixed a loose board on the back porch, where she nearly twisted an ankle. Silas noticed too. He still kept to his ledgers and long rides along the fence line, but he started finding reasons to pass through the kitchen. Wanted to be sure the new stovepipe's drawing right, he might say, though she had seen him test it himself only the night before. Or, we'll be bringing in a herd tomorrow. You'll need extra coffee on. He would linger a moment longer than necessary, eyes tracking her hands as she worked, then remember himself and leave. One evening, Clara came back to her little room and stopped in the doorway. The wobbly table in the corner no longer wobbled. Someone had planed the leg and wedged a small, clean block of wood beneath it. Above it, a small mirror had been hung on the wall, the glass a bit cloudy but whole. She touched the frame. No one needed to tell her who had done it. The next morning, after breakfast, the trouble started. A knot of younger hands sat at the far end of the table, stuffing biscuits 2 at a time into their mouths, talking louder than they worked. Clara heard her name before she heard the words. "I'm telling you, any man that marries that cook is set for life," one crowed. "Look at the way she treats us now, and we ain't even trying." Laughter. Another voice, rough with too much coffee and not enough sense, added, "I wouldn't mind her bringing me a plate in bed." The joke turned coarser. Chairs scraped as a few of the older hands shifted uncomfortably. Clara froze at the stove, one hand on the coffee pot. Heat rose in her face that had nothing to do with the firebox. She had heard talk like that before, in farmyards and at small-town dances. It had cost her jobs, sleep, and every bit of pride she owned. She could swallow almost anything, but humiliation still burned going down. She was weighing whether to ignore it or slam the pot down and walk out with whatever dignity she could gather when another voice cut across the room. "Enough!" The word was not loud, but it landed heavy. The men turned. Silas stood in the doorway, hat in his hand, eyes hard as river stones in winter. "You boys got work to do, or are you planning on sitting there till the coffee goes cold?" he asked. One of the younger hands, a freckled fellow, too quick with his mouth, tried to grin. "We were just talking, boss. Paying the new cook a compliment. Then you need to learn the difference between a compliment and disrespect." Silas stepped closer, voice still low but edged. "Miss Benton is here to work. She feeds every one of you 3 times a day. She gets the same respect you'd give me, or you go find some other place to eat. Clear?" Silence. "Yes, sir," came at last, muttered and uneasy. Silas let his gaze travel the length of the table, making brief eye contact with each man. "I don't want to hear one more word like that in this room. Not about her, not about any woman. You understand me?" This time the answer was stronger. "Yes, sir." He nodded once, then turned his head toward Clara, just enough for their eyes to meet for a heartbeat. There was apology there, and something else, something protective he did not know how to name. Then he picked up a biscuit, poured himself coffee at the far counter, and left as if nothing had happened. Buck, one of the older hands, caught Clara's eye as he stood to leave. "Never heard him speak up like that for anybody," he said quietly. "You must have done something right, Mom." That night, Clara found another small change in her room, an extra quilt folded at the foot of her bed, thick and clean against the mountain cold. Days stretched into weeks, work settled into a rhythm. Silas remained a man of few words, but sometimes if she stepped onto the back porch late, she would find him there looking out over the dark pasture, coffee cup cooling in his hand. He would nod, she would nod. Sometimes that was all. Once in a while, not trusting his voice for anything bigger, he would say, "Biscuits were good tonight," or "My men ride better when they're fed like that." It was the closest thing to praise he knew how to give. She took it for the treasure it was. Then, one hot afternoon when the sky had looked strange all day, grey at the edges and heavy in the middle, a rider came up the lane with dust on his boots and a city cut to his coat. Clara saw him from the kitchen window and went still. She knew that kind of hat, that kind of stiff collar. It was like seeing a ghost made of ink and signatures. Silas met the man in the yard. Clara could not hear all the words, but she heard enough. "Inspection! Note on the property. Denver and Frontier wants reassurance the operation is sound." The rider's gaze drifted toward the house, then caught on Clara in the shadow of the doorway. His brow creased. "You there?" he called. "Have we met?" Her hand tightened on the doorframe. "No, sir," she said. He tilted his head. "Benton, isn't it? We had a file on a Benton place not 3 months back. Widow, cabin on Willow Branch Road." Clara's throat closed. Silas's jaw clenched so hard, a vein showed at his temple. "She works here now," he said, "and that's all that concerns this ranch." The man chuckled. Not kindly. "You always did have a soft spot you tried to hide, Reed. Funny you walk away from collections, and they still follow you up the mountain." He left a packet of papers, took a look at the herd, and rode out again, leaving dust and old ghosts swirling in his wake. That evening, a storm finally broke. Wind came first, roaring down from the high ridges, slamming shutters and tearing at loose boards. Then lightning, sharp and white against a purple sky. Thunder rolled so close it rattled pans on their hooks. Clara was pulling bread from the oven when Toby burst through the back door, rain in his hair and panic in his eyes. "Fire!" he shouted. "Lightning took the north hay shed!" Every bad memory in Clara's life told her to freeze. Instead, she set the pan down and ran. Out in the yard, the world had turned orange. Flames licked at the side of the hay shed, climbing fast toward the roof, driven by the wind. The air was thick with smoke and the sharp, dry smell of burning grass. Men ran in all directions, shouting, looking for orders that were not coming. Because Silas, the man they always looked to, stood a few yards from the blaze, utterly still. His face had gone bloodless. His eyes were fixed on the flames, but they were seeing something else, something that did not belong to this day. His hands shook at his sides. "Boss!" Buck yelled. "What do we do?" Silas swallowed, but no words came. Once, years ago, he had watched a barn burn while a debtor's family screamed beside him. It had been meant as a warning, a scare. It had gone too far, too fast. A boy had died in that fire. Silas had carried the boy's name in his sleep ever since. Now the sight of flames climbing dry wood turned his legs to stone. Clara saw it all in a heartbeat. The way his shoulders locked, the way his gaze wasn't really on the present. She didn't know the story yet, but she knew the look of a person trapped in an old nightmare. So she stepped into the space he should have filled. "You!" she shouted, pointing to the men closest to the well. "Buckets, as many as you can carry. Make a line from the pump to the shed. You two, get those horses out of the south corral and into the far pasture. If this jumps, I don't want them anywhere near it." Her voice cut clean through the thunder. Men moved. Whether they obeyed because she had been feeding them for weeks, or because a command is a command when the sky is on fire, she didn't know. She just kept talking. "Wet blankets, anything you've got," she called. "Keep low when you go near the door. Don't breathe deep. We're saving the house and the main barn first. If the shed has to go, it goes. Nobody dies for hay." They formed a bucket line. Water sloshed over boots and into the dust. Smoke stung eyes and throats. Clara's dress steamed where sparks landed and died. She coughed, shouted, pushed men back when they got too close, pulled them forward when they tried to hang back. The fire ate part of the roof, roared like a wild thing, and then, slowly, began to lose. Rain came in earnest at last. Heavy and slanting, hissing when it hit hot wood. Steam rolled up. The flames shrank from orange rage to sullen glow to blackened timber. When it was finally over, the north shed was half gone and a good portion of the hay with it. But the main barn stood. The house stood. The horses blew nervously in the far pasture, but they were alive. So were all the men. Clara realized her hands were shaking only when she tried to push hair out of her face and smeared soot instead. Her forearms burned in shallow lines where sparks had kissed skin. Her lungs felt scraped raw. Across the yard, Silas still stood where she had first seen him. Only now his eyes were not on the ruins of the shed. They were on her. Clara's legs remembered to fold before the rest of her did. She sat down hard on an overturned bucket, chest heaving, watching the last thread of smoke curl into the storm-dark sky. Someone pressed a wet cloth into her hand. "Toby." "For your arms, Mom," he said, worry plain on his soot-streaked face. "You ought to let Doc Miller take a look." "I'm all right," she managed, though the skin stung like fire all over again when she touched it. "See to the others first." "We're fine," Buck said, limping a little, but grinning anyway. "You're the one who jumped into the devil's kitchen for us." He turned his head and raised his voice. "Boss?" Silas had not moved toward them yet. He took a few slow steps now, like a man learning how to walk again. Rain had plastered his hair to his forehead. Soot streaked one side of his face where he had wiped it with an unsteady hand. He stopped in front of Clara and looked down at her burned arms, at her wet dress, at the way she was trying not to tremble. "Buck," he said without looking away from her, "get those men inside and see who needs salve or bandages. Count heads. I want to know every one of them is standing." "Yes, sir." The yard emptied by degrees. Hoofbeats faded as someone led the last of the horses back under cover. Rain softened the sharp edges of what had just happened, turning smoke to a faint, bitter smell. At last, it was only the two of them by the blackened shed. Silas crouched so his eyes were level with hers. Up close she saw the storm in them, and the shame. "I froze," he said. "No preamble, no excuse. You know it, they know it. A fire starts on my land, and I stood there like a fool while you did my job." You were remembering something, Clara said quietly. Something worse than this. He flinched. The truth of it seemed to hurt more than the burns probably hurt her. Years back, he said, voice rough, I rode for Denver and Frontier, not with a ledger like that man today. With a gun, they'd send me out to encourage folks to pay. I told myself I was only doing a job, same as any man swinging a hammer or a rope. But there was this one place, a dry little farm down in the flats. Man was 3 months behind, had a wife, a boy about 10. He stared past her at the ruin of the shed, but his eyes were somewhere far away. I lit a small fire in his empty barn stall just to scare him. Just a bundle of straw, meant to make smoke, not trouble. Wind took it, dry wood took it. By the time we got it out, the boy was gone. He'd gone in for a calf. I carried him out myself. The bank man wrote it up as an unfortunate accident. Silas's laugh came out ragged. I wrote it up on my soul. I tried to quit after that. They told me I was soft, said the territory would eat soft men for breakfast. He rubbed both hands over his face. Rainwater streaked through the soot. When I saw that shed go up today, I was right back there. Same flames, same screaming. I could hear his mother. I could smell. He broke off, swallowing hard. I wanted to move. I couldn't. Clara listened, her own burns forgotten for the moment. She had pictured Silas as hard from the start, a man born with edges. She had not imagined this, a man who had tried to walk away from something ugly and found it followed him anyway. You left that work, she said softly. You built this instead. She nodded at the house, the corrals, the men moving in and out of the lamplight. You didn't have to take any of us on. You could have gone off into the hills and lived alone with your ghosts. You didn't. He shook his head. Doesn't change what I did, and it doesn't change what the bank did to you. I carried papers just like the ones that took your cabin. I might not have been there that day, but men like me built that machine. Clara held his gaze. Then men like you get to help build something else. For a moment, the only sounds were rain dripping from the broken eaves and the faint clatter of someone stacking salvage boards in the distance. You stepped in when you couldn't, she went on. That doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. I've been frozen in my own ways. When Tom died, I stared at a door I should have walked out of and didn't move for 3 days. Ephraim said if I hadn't finally put one foot in front of the other, he'd have found me in that cabin years from now, a ghost with a pan in her hands. A tired smile flickered at the corner of Silas's mouth. You think I'm worth forgiving? He asked, and there was something bare and boyish in the question that startled her. I think you're worth more than you think, Clara said. I think the man who froze at that fire is the same man who fixed a table leg so I wouldn't spill my coffee and hung a mirror so I could see whether I had flour on my face before I served breakfast. I think the trust lost a good man, and this ranch gained one. She hesitated, then added, and I think you didn't owe me that story, so thank you for giving it anyway. He blew out a breath that sounded like it had been sitting in his chest for 6 years. You saved my men, he said. You saved my stock. You probably saved my house. You burned your own hands doing it. I don't know what to give you in return, that's big enough. Clara looked down at her arms, at the raw, angry lines that would scar but heal. I didn't do it for a reward, she said. I did it because this is my home now, whether you've put that down on any paper or not. His head lifted sharply. You think of it that way? Yes, she answered simply. I had a cabin once. It turned out to be made of debt. This place is made of work and people. That feels more real to me. Silas stood then, as if the weight on his shoulders had shifted from crushing to merely heavy. He held out his hand. Come inside, he said. Doc Miller will be here soon enough. After that, he swallowed, as though the words were harder than any he had spoken about fire and death. After that, I'd like to talk to you at the table with the fixed leg, properly, not as boss and cook, as a man asking a woman if she might be willing to stay, not just for another week, for as long as it takes for both of us to believe we deserve a little peace. Clara stared at his hand. It was big and capable, the hand of a man who had done harm once and spent years trying to do good enough to quiet it. Her own hand was smaller, fingers reddened and bandaged. When she laid it in his grip was careful, almost reverent. I already told you I'd stay the week, she said, a shaky smile tugging at her mouth. Staying the rest? We can discuss that over coffee. Strong coffee, he said. With biscuits, she added. He laughed then, a real sound, rusty from disuse but warm. Together they walked back toward the house, side by side, rain softening to a mist around them. In the weeks that followed, the blackened frame of the north shed stood as a kind of marker in the yard, a reminder of what had nearly been lost and what had been saved. The men told the story often, around the table and out on the range. In their version, the boss was honest about freezing, and the cook was the one who shouted sense into chaos and pulled them all through. Some evenings, when the work was done and the light turned gold along the ridge, folks passing on the trail could see two figures sitting on the back porch of the big house, a man with dark hair going silver at the temples, and a young woman with a bandage fading to pink on her forearm. Sometimes she rested her head lightly against his shoulder. Sometimes he covered her hand with his, thumb tracing an absent-minded circle over skin that no longer shook. They did not speak much about the boy in the burned barn or the cabin full of debts. They spoke about the next carving season, and whether Clara's apple pies could beat Buck's memory of his mother's, and if someday they might add another room to the house that faced the sunrise instead of the storms. Clara May Benton had once looked at her life and said in desperation, "I'm not worth much, sir, but I can cook." Silas Reed spent the rest of his days answering her with quiet proof that she had been wrong about that first part. And up in the mountain territory, on a ranch that had come close to burning, two people who thought they had already had their share of endings found out that sometimes when you offer the little you have left with an honest heart, you get back something you never expected, not just a job or a roof, but a home and a hand you can finally hold without fear.